Green Goblin was an absolutely stellar first villain for Spider-Man to fight, and Willem Dafoe did an absolutely incredible job in the role. He brought so much nuance to the character. He showed his fractured relationship with his son, his mental health problems, he showed the businessman that was willing to put himself on the line, and he even had a bit of the campiness. He was just insanely multi-layered and brilliant. But unfortunately, he died at the end of the movie, and we never got to see him again until now with No Way Home. But what if he never died? What if he didn't try to remotely kill Spider-Man with his glider and instead he was simply arrested? Simply put, what if the Green Goblin didn't die? So somehow, the Green Goblin doesn't try using his glider to kill Spider-Man. I know he would've, but for some reason he doesn't, so he doesn't die. Instead, after Peter makes his heroic speech about how he already has a father, and his name was Ben Parker, he simply takes Norman to prison. Now, if Norman tries to convince him to keep his identity as Green Goblin a secret, which I imagine he would, I don't think Peter would listen, just because, if he let him go, that means he's letting go of a man that's obviously mentally unstable, and has a lot of dangerous hardware at his disposal. I just don't think that's in Spider-Man's character to let that slide, honestly. So Spider-Man does take Norman to the police with evidence of his crimes as the Green Goblin. So now Norman is actually able to afford himself the best lawyer that money can buy, but it's not enough to dissuade the jury. They just see him as guilty. So Norman in the end is basically forced to plead insanity, which is actually true. I mean, that was a legitimate side effect of the performance-enhancing chemical they used on himself, and he also killed a lot of people. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that he did do that. So he's not set free on this insanity plea, and instead he goes to a mental institution. So now, for obvious reasons, Harry Osborn does not declare revenge on Spider-Man, because he's not angry at Spider-Man, he's angry at his father. Remember, his father tried to kill Mary Jane, the woman he loves, and did kill a lot of other people. So he's actually embarrassed to be his father's son, and he refuses to visit him at the mental hospital. So instead, in Spider-Man 2, Harry is thrust into this new position of power at Oscorp that he's really not ready for, which is something I kind of wish the actual movie addressed, because he's less than 20 years old and he's never worked at Oscorp a day in his life, so I just think it would have been a realistic thing to do. And also it should be noted is that Harry's getting a lot of flack by his coworkers, and it's not just because he's a young man in a prominent position, but it's also because his father was the Green Goblin, a man who, if you remember, killed the old board of directors. And so, yeah, they're all turning on him, guilt by association. And one of his most adamant detractors, actually, is a man named Adrian Toomes, who's actually regularly scheming against Harry to try and get his job. He wants to slander him. And now I know Adrian Toomes was not really in Spider-Man 2. Let me explain. Kurt Connors was in Spider-Man 2 and 3. Sam Raimi was building him up to eventually become the Lizard. And I think you could do the same thing with a different villain, with Adrian Toomes to eventually become the Vulture. Because, it would be kind of symbolic, because he's going after Harry's job, like picking at the scraps, a little on the nose, I know. Also, there's the fact that the Vulture suit looks a lot like the Green Goblin suit, so I think it would make a lot of sense for it to be made by the same people. So now, Harry feels this intense pressure to prove that he's not his father, that he can be better than his father. So he makes this deal with Otto Octavius, just like he did in the actual movie, to prove that he can be better than his father. And he promises, just like he did, to take Oscorp to heights that his father could have only dreamed of. Unfortunately for him, though, the experiment still goes horribly wrong and turns Otto into Dr. Octopus, and Toomes just latches onto that. He has even more of a reason to start turning people against Harry, and so Harry gets really depressed, and he gets drunk at the planetarium just like he did. But instead of getting into it with Peter, he actually gets into it with Mary Jane, who he's more than a little bit pissed off at for leaving him out of the blue in the last movie. Now, he didn't really complain about it, but I'm guessing the reason he didn't really complain about it is because he was busy with his Spider-Man revenge quest. So I do think with that out of the way, he would take the time to linger on this and be like, you know, what the hell? Why'd you leave me like that? And so he's getting into it with Mary Jane, they're arguing, and that's when he's confronted by John Jameson, who tries to stick up for his, fiance, his brand new fiance, and the two actually almost get into a drunken brawl, but ultimately it is thankfully calmed down by Peter, who Harry then vents to. So now later on in the movie, Doc Ock, he still confronts Harry at his home, but not just because he wants tritium, no. He also wants to kill Spider-Man. And now I know that he didn't want to kill Spider-Man in the actual movie, but since Harry doesn't want Spider-Man dead in this timeline, this is the only way I could do it without ruining the Spider-Man Doc Ock stuff, so forgive me for that. I'm changing it this one time. And so now, if you're wondering why Doc confronts Harry, it's because he thinks Harry knows who Spider-Man is. Spider-Man exposed his father, so he assumes Harry must know who he is. But Harry doesn't know who he is, and not only does he not know, but he doesn't really want to know. He doesn't even want Spider-Man to be dead. He doesn't hate Spider-Man at all in this timeline. But unfortunately, Doc Ock still dangles him off the roof, and Harry is really, really trying hard not to mention Peter, because he knows that Peter probably knows who Spider-Man is, but in the end, Otto basically puts him in a position that he can't get out of. He threatens to kill his father at the asylum, and now Harry's put into a weird position, because yeah, he resents his father a lot now, but not enough to want him to die. So he has to choose between his best friend and his father. And knowing Harry, he chooses his father. And so, yeah, he tells him about Peter, and he allows Doc to take the tritium, just like he did. So now we cut ahead to Doc Ock attacking Peter and MJ at the cafe, and Peter still becomes Spider-Man. This is what motivates him to finally be Spider-Man again, just like in the actual movie. So then we still get the train fight, but now Doc Ock isn't looking to capture Spider-Man, no. He's looking to kill Spider-Man, so he's not going easy. He's going a lot more brutal than he did, but in the end, things pretty much go the same way. He destroys the brakes on the train because he thinks this is the best way to weaken Spider-Man up. He'll have to use all his energy to stop the train, which works. But in the end, he decides not to kill Spider-Man, but capture him. The arms convince him that killing him isn't good enough. He should be forced to watch this little experiment. So now Spider-Man and Mary Jane are actually chained up next to each other as Doc is finalizing the finishing touches of his fusion reaction experiment, and Doc actually exposes Peter as Spider-Man. He takes a bit of amusement in that, actually, and he says he remembers Connors called him brilliant but lazy, and says, well, that explains a lot. And now MJ is absolutely shocked to see who Spider-Man is. In the end, though, Peter does actually manage to quietly break free, and he tries to help out MJ, but he does get caught by Doc. So then the fight between them goes pretty much the same, and in the end, Peter convinces Doc that he has to give up the thing he wants the most. And so then Doc, he sacrifices himself to drown the fusion reactor, just like he did. So now we get to the end of the movie, and we see Harry being ousted from Oscorp Industries by Adrian Toomes and the rest of the board of directors. They vote him out, exactly like they did to his father in the last movie. And Harry is pissed off that he's been trying so hard to get better, and they didn't even give him the chance. And so now MJ, in the end, she still abandons her wedding with John to be with Peter, and we actually see that Harry in the stands seems happy again for a moment. This is like the first time he's been happy in a good while, because he's a little bit hopeful that now that she's not marrying John, that he can pursue her. Unfortunately, this is just sadly leading him up for disappointment, of course. So now we've made it to Spider-Man 3, and we see that Harry is not in a good way at all. He's become an alcoholic, he obsessively reads the newspaper about Adrian Toomes, and how he apparently has made Oscorp better than it's been in years. And most depressingly, we see him going out on dates, but not just with any women. With red-headed women. Oh boy. So yeah, Harry is basically trying to replace MJ, and this is only making him more miserable because obviously none of them are going to be MJ. And on top of that, he loses his family fortune, he loses his mansion, and we actually see him having a very tearful goodbye with his butler, who always saw the Osborns to be his family. So then we see later on that Peter is doing a lot better than Harry, and he's actually a lot less stressed out in this movie because Harry's not trying to kill him, so he has one less thing to worry about. But MJ, unfortunately, is just as miserable as she was because she still gets fired, and she still sees Peter kissing another woman in the exact same way that they had their first kiss. Seriously, Peter, dick move. So now she does still go to Harry's house just like she did in the actual movie, and they have their kitchen dance and eventual kiss. But MJ, of course, still regrets it. And Harry is more than a little disappointed that she thought of their moment as a mistake. So now at his lowest point, he finally decides to visit his father at the asylum, which he's been trying not to do. And so now Norman tries to tell Harry that Peter is Spider-Man, which Harry says is nuts, and Norman, he begs Harry to please avenge him. Spider-Man's the one who put him in prison. Spider-Man's the one who did all this to him, framed him as the Green Goblin. But Harry refuses. He refuses to do that. He calls his father crazy and says he's not going to kill his best friend just because his father said so. He's not going to kill basically his brother just to appease his father, who turned out to be fucking crazy anyway. And so, unfortunately, Norman gets the last laugh in the end, though, when he reminds him that it was Peter who took MJ away from him. And Harry, he ponders that, but in the end, he does shake it off and walks away. So the next we see of Harry, we see that he's actually having a really hard time finding a regular job because he slacked in school and he bypassed college. So then we see that he actually starts attending the same college as Peter. Now, they don't have the same class or anything, but they are at the same school once again, just like when they were kids. But there is an underlying tension there because Peter's dating MJ, and Harry likes MJ, so that's a little bit awkward. However, he actually does still see MJ, because he starts working at the same nightclub as her. Now, you can actually have it be a coincidence, or you can say that Harry did it on purpose to be close to her. It really doesn't matter. So now, by this point, it also should be noted that Peter gets the black suit, but he's not nearly as obnoxious with it. He's not flirting with other women, he's not pursuing Gwen Stacy, because remember, Harry doesn't force Mary Jane under threat of death to start breaking up with Peter. That whole scene with them on the bridge where she breaks up with him, that doesn't happen. So yeah, even though MJ's mad at him, they actually stay together. So Peter actually, he still gets Eddie Brock fired for being trash, lol, but he does not pursue Gwen Stacy. So Eddie does not pray for Peter to be killed. So that means he does not become Venom. And I will get into who it will really be in a minute, don't worry. So now Peter's been extra douchey to MJ lately because of the suit, but he's also been a lot more confident. Like their nightlife is stronger than ever, but that's really the only good thing about their relationship right now. His attitude has just been so poor, and they're arguing with each other a lot. And whenever they get into a huge fight, she goes to Harry for a shoulder to cry on. And now MJ elects not to tell Peter about this friendship because she's worried that Peter's going to get really jealous because, they did kiss, which of course Peter also doesn't know about, and MJ doesn't want him to know about that. So MJ also doesn't say that Harry's working with her at the nightclub. She wants her relationship with Peter to get better because she still loves him, so she tries her best to keep this friendship hidden from him. Well, unfortunately, that all goes out the window when Peter actually goes to the nightclub and he sees Harry and MJ talking and smiling with each other, and he immediately gets hella jealous and he makes a huge ass of himself by flirting with and dancing with one of the waitresses right in front of MJ. And Harry and MJ are just both absolutely disgusted by Peter. And Harry tries to be like, what the hell is wrong with you? But Peter just fucking hits him in the face. They get into a huge fight with each other right in the middle of the club. And this is heartbreaking for MJ to see. So she tries to break it up, and then Peter swings around and he knocks her to the ground on accident. And it's in that moment he lets go of Harry and he just sits back and realizes, what the hell have I done? What the hell has this suit turned me into? And he decides to go to the church to get rid of the suit. Unfortunately, though, Harry actually tailed him to the church to basically be like, what is going on with you? And he ends up becoming Venom. Yeah, because it honestly made so much sense for Harry to be Venom, and now he is. So, yeah, now he becomes Venom. He doesn't use those performance enhancers to become the new Goblin. He bypasses all that and goes straight to being Venom. The symbiote gives him all the strength that he needs. So now, something I should mention is that I was always under the impression that Harry already had mental health issues prior to becoming the new Goblin, because he did hallucinate his father at the end of Spider-Man 2. And so now we see that the symbiote is actually just enhancing his already mental instability, and he actually kidnaps MJ in a moment of psychotic craze. So now Harry brings Mary Jane to his old mansion, which is now all abandoned and decrepit. There's cobwebs everywhere, the furniture's all gone, it's just an absolute shell of what it used to be. But before Peter can rescue Mary Jane, he has to fight the Sandman, because right now he actually doesn't know that Harry has MJ. So he fights the Sandman, and in the end, he still forgives him, even after, hearing that he killed Uncle Ben. Because he killed him by mistake, and he was just trying to help out his daughter. So despite how hard it is for Peter, he still forgives him. So now Peter's anger is mostly gone, and has been replaced by just raw emotion. Which is why, of course, it's just perfect timing when he hears about Harry kidnapping Mary Jane. And so Harry, in order to get his attention, just does horrible, horrible crimes, like possibly even murder, to get his attention. Because, of course, now Harry knows that Peter is Spider-Man. He saw him at the top of the tower, just like Eddie did, and he resents him because he took Mary Jane from him. And with his mind now corrupted by the symbiote, he starts blaming Peter for all these things that had nothing to do with him, like how his time at Oscorp turned out, how his relationship with Mary Jane turned out. He said if it wasn't for Peter, then maybe he and Mary Jane would still be together. And so now we get to the final showdown of the movies, where Harry and Peter have one final showdown at the Osborn Manor, with Mary Jane waiting in the wings, sobbing. She absolutely has such a hard time watching the two men that she's grown up with and loves to death, fighting each other, and knowing that one of them might die. She's screaming at them to stop, but they're not listening. And in the end, Peter, he tries to help Harry overcome the suit by confessing his own problems. He tells him about how the suit made him feel, and that he knows what it must be doing to Harry. He knows that it must be making him feel better at his worst. He understands that. But he needs to take it off. He needs to let it go, because yeah, life is messy, but all we can do really is try and make heroes of ourselves in both big and small ways. Peter then tells Harry to look at himself. Look at what he's doing right now. He says his father, the Green Goblin, did the same thing. He threatened Mary Jane's life, and he hated him for that. He says that the Harry he knows would not do that. And he repeats what he said to Doc Ock in the last movie. He says that there's a hero in all of us, but sometimes we have to be steady and give up the thing that we want the most, aka Mary Jane. And Harry realizes Peter is right, and together they actually remove the symbiote and destroy it. And we see that Harry is finally moving on from the past. He gives them his blessing, and that's how his story ends. He survives the events of Spider-Man 3, and he lives to fight another day, possibly as a hero in his own right, or possibly he leaves New York to start a new adventure unknown. Who knows? But either way, that is what would happen if the Green Goblin didn't die in Spider-Man 1. So yes, I know I took some creative liberties with this. I know Adrian Toomes was not in these movies, but I thought it would be cool to give Harry more of a focus. Because, I know it's Spider-Man's name on the title, so I know that the main focus probably should be Peter, Mary Jane, and then the villain, but I think Harry kind of got the short end of the stick. He got plenty of time, don't get me wrong, but I think he could have gotten more. There was a story I think could have been told with his time at Oscorp that I kind of wanted to see unfold, and honestly, I think his time at Oscorp would be even harder with everybody now knowing that Green Goblin's his dad. Because Harry's time at Oscorp was not that hard because, as far as they all knew, Norman was dead. He just died normally. But now they know for sure that he didn't. That he was the Green Goblin, and he killed their competitors, He killed all these people. And I think seeing Harry try to overcome what his father was, and then in the end, almost becoming his father with the symbiote, would have been a really interesting story to see unfold. And I also really wanted to do this story where he's like obsessing over Mary Jane because, yeah, I mean, he lost everything by the end of Spider-Man 2. He lost, his father was in jail. His name had been tarnished. He lost his home. He lost his job. And he lost Mary Jane to his best friend, I just think that that's a story that I would have liked to see explored even more because, yeah, I mean, he was definitely jealous of Peter and Mary Jane, don't get me wrong, but the focus was more on avenging his father. And now I think with that out of the way, you can really explore the romantic triangle aspect of this franchise, which I know is not for everybody. Don't get me wrong. I know not everybody's going to like that direction. And by no means am I saying that this video is what it should have been. Like, honestly, I think that the way it went is pretty much perfect, Spider-Man 3 aside, which has a lot of issues, of course, but I overall think that this trilogy is perfect the way that it is. But this is just a hypothetical. It was a fun hypothetical to do. I got a lot more passionate about it than I thought I was going to be. And yeah, it was really interesting to think about, what if Norman had been exposed and the Osborn name was tarnished? How much that would affect Harry's arc in this trilogy. Now that he no longer wants to kill Spider-Man, he just wants to be with Mary Jane again, because Mary Jane is, in his mind, all that he's got left, her and Peter. And now, in a way, he's kind of lost them both. He doesn't feel comfortable being friends, really, with Peter because he's so jealous of him and MJ. And then, he goes to these lengths to try and get MJ back, working with her at the nightclub, or, as I said, it could be a coincidence. Either way, it's just a storyline I think would have been interesting to see. But by no means do I think it's better than the trilogy we got. It's just a fun hypothetical. And I know you guys are probably getting really tired of me making Harry Osborn Venom in my videos, but I'm sorry, it's the way it should have gone, in my opinion. Like, Eddie Brock, he was so unnecessary, honestly, to the story. I really didn't see the point in him at all. And I honestly think by making Harry Osborn Venom, they could have cut out the middleman. They could have skipped all the Gwen Stacy drama, which, of course, in this video, I'm keeping that because it still happens. But obviously, in the finished movie, they didn't need to do any of that, in my opinion. And that's why I keep making Harry Osborn Venom, because I just think it's a great way to finish off their rivalry. They spent 3 movies building up Harry to be the big, enemy of Spider-Man 3. And I think by making him Venom, you could compromise, because Sony was going to force Sam Raimi to put Venom in. And I think making Harry Venom would be a good compromise. That way you can have the Venom character in a way that doesn't fuck with the existing story. You don't have to throw in Eddie Brock just to be like, oh, it's Eddie Brock Venom, just like in the comics, But yeah, overall, I do think that the trilogy itself is pretty good. The first 2 movies are masterpieces, and the third one is not as bad as people say it is, but it definitely has a lot of issues. But I had so much fun making this scenario. I took some creative liberties, but I liked what I did personally. But if you guys hate what I did, feel free to tell me in the comments down below. And also give me more what if recommendations, whether it's about Spider-Man or whatever you want. Whatever you want to ask, and I'll try to do it. Also give this video a thumbs up and share with all of your friends and all your various social media platforms, and I will see all you guys in the next video.